Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Between the Lines. My name is John Lofton. I'm so glad you guys are here, and it just occurred to me I had the wrong logo up on top. But the reason for that, and I'm just going to leave it, you know why? Because I can. It's my other channel, Lofton Space. Earlier in the week, we actually did a very special video where we unboxed the new Galaxy Z Fold 3. So you could call this a little cross-promotion, but I just happened to realize that didn't update. Funny how OBS shows you one thing in your preview and then puts another thing in program. But anyway, we're going to have a great show. Welcome to Between the Lines. That is today's show. Today we're going to have a little bit softer topic. Now, but before we get into any of that too, I do have a serious note that I want to share with everybody. I honestly want to send out my heartfelt, prayers and just thoughts with the people in Louisiana and affected on the Gulf Coast. My dad's actually going to be affected by this, the hurricane that's moving through. Please keep those guys in your prayer. Their governor was saying that they think this might even be worse than Katrina. Like they hadn't experienced this since 1850. This magnitude of a hurricane. So just be with those folks. And for me, I pray that God puts a hedge of protection on those folks. They built up their levee system after Katrina, so we all honestly just hope that they're doing well and that they survive as minimal property damage as possible. In Iowa, we panic when we talk about tornadoes, and we had the derecho, but I can't imagine being in the middle of a hurricane. So I just want to send out some prayers here real quick to the folks out in Louisiana and the Gulf Coast. Pray that those folks are safe and are with family or friends and loved ones, and I pray that they are able to ride out this storm. So but today we're going to be talking about families. I saw a video on YouTube earlier this week. Now, I watch a lot of different folks. So when I mentioned the channel name that I was watching, please do not chalk me up as a hardcore right-wing conservative by nature. I watch everybody. Left, right, middle, up, down, back, forth. It doesn't matter, because as I've always stated as a principle to you guys, get a wide swath of media information as much as you can or want, I guess, if you will, so that you sort of kind of can deduce what the actual core facts of the case are that don't seem to waver from one side or another. What are some of the commonalities? And then go out and do your own research. So for me, I watch a lot of folks. This one happened to come from Steven Crowder, from a YouTube show you may be familiar with, Louder with Crowder. No, I don't watch him all the time, but I was curious in his case. He just had heart surgery, and he had a really close call in recovery where his lungs actually filled up with blood, and he nearly died. And he was talking in his video about being like this close to death, and what went through his mind. He didn't even call 911 right away. He waited the entire night, and he talked about how he was only taking absolute minimal breaths. He could not get air in, and when he finally got to the hospital, one of his lungs was completely filled, and there was just a tiny little opening in the other lung. But one of the things he said is, he talked about how he thinks about his twins, because he has brand new children, and he talked about how having that family element now makes people just that much more conservative. And I thought, is there any evidence to that? And is this just a him sort of thing, or is this perception, or is there actually some foundation to the statement that simply by having a family, that you're going to tend to be more conservative than, let's say, a single family, or, and also I found some research too that talked about the size of the family, as far as number of kids, and all of that, and just the overall size of the home. I didn't get very far in the economics. I apologize. My research actually kind of ran out. I was running a bit behind this week. in some of my final show preparations. So if you happen to click on that Google Drive link in the show description below and did not see today's show notes and you just saw the ones from last week when we were talking about Afghanistan, if you look now, that file, that PDF file should be there. And you are always welcome to see my notes, my research, and kind of how I came up with this. So I'm going to talk, as I always do, just quickly about my background, my history, the things that affected me, and kind of how I grew up and why I tend to be a little bit more conservative. And it isn't just because I'm a Christian either. And I'm going to kind of debunk some of those theories too, and even share some of my own personal thoughts with opinions that may actually go different than what you think a evangelical Christian would typically believe. So let's go ahead and I just want to tell you a quick story. I was an only child as a kid. My mom ended up being a single mom. My folks were divorced when I was 5. And, my dad was disabled. He was totally blind. And so he didn't exactly have the ability to come and see me whenever he wants. And I can't hold that against him. Now, the way that they split, later in life, I found out, and there was some information that it was difficult for me to process. But nevertheless, my mom raised me. Plain and simple, that's the main caregiver I ever knew as a child, from a parental standpoint. Now, but see, because I had some medical issues and things like that, and I've talked about this in previous episodes, my mom had to work a lot. And I mean a lot, like 3 jobs, a lot. She was a manager for a medical billing company in Memphis. She worked in a mailroom for a bank overnight hours. And even on the weekends, she'd work at a local McDonald's just down the road from us. And so she put in a lot of effort just to take care of me, because medical insurance isn't what it is today even. There was a lot of expenses. Every time I would lose a contact lens, or every time I'd lose my glasses, and as kids, a parent, you kind of get the cushion of 2 incomes, when they're married. But when it's a single mom trying to do it, you lose that. Now, my dad being disabled, there wasn't a lot of child support in there. I know he helped because he did work. Still, that was the biggest issue. And I spent a lot of time at sitters and daycares. And to my mom's credit, she didn't just pick white single old ladies. She actually had me a couple times. I remember being with a Mexican family. I remember being with an Indian family, a black family, for a while, and they were all different sorts. So for me as a kid, I actually kind of got to see a dynamic of different families, interactions, the culture. And as a young kid, I'm actually kind of thankful for that, to be honest with you. I remember the first time I had an egg roll, like a traditional Indian. I had curry one time as a kid, and I vomited 5 minutes later. But I tried it. Not my thing, as a kid, but it was interesting to have different foods. It was interesting. I distinctly remember one of the sitters. It was with the African American family that my mom had put me with, and the lady was good friends. They were actually coworkers, and but I remember one of her teenage sons, and they had a big family too. Like, you're talking about 5, 6 kids living in like a 3-bedroom apartment, basically, is what it was. It was not a lot of room, and yet they still had me in there, and it was different. It was really different. They're a very kind family, though. I do remember that. But one of her teenage sons came home, and there was a cop outside, and I do remember having sort of this, it almost seemed the family was really uneasy. Now, obviously, I think it was mostly just because their son came home with a cop escort. I don't think he got in trouble necessarily, but the cop brought him home essentially. And I was too young to really knew what was happening or what was going on, but I do remember it. But I do remember there feeling an uneasiness within the other kids in the home. Now, today I look back and I wonder, was that chalking up to the idea of prejudice based on their skin? Were they nervous that he was going to get in more trouble simply because he was black versus, if I were a teenage boy dealing with a cop, would I have gotten in less trouble? I don't know. It'd be pure speculative. And honestly, you could argue it one way or another. But with the limited information that I remember about it as a young person, but I remember that dynamic. And so when I was thinking about today's show and I was thinking about all the experiences I had, growing up in my family and even extended family, if you count all the sitters I was with. Um, it sort of shaped this sort of mind for me that thinks about, how do families think? How did I change too, especially when I had my own kid? Um, and is it different if I were to have another kid? I think I put out a Facebook post not too long ago. It was a song that just happened to come on my YouTube stream, and it was Butterfly Kisses. And of course, you listen to any country song, and you get to hear all kinds of things about dads and daughters. And I'm going to touch on that later. I don't want to spill too much of that because there was an interesting article I found about how if you have daughters, that you are more conservative and tend to lean more Republican. We're gonna get to that. That'll be fun. All right. So, and I thought about this, and at the end, as I always do in every show, I'll share my own thoughts and opinion. Okay. So, what makes up a family dynamic? When we think traditional families, do we still think of what we saw on TV in the 1960s, 70s, and maybe even early 80s? Do we think about extended cases too? Like maybe think about shows like The Brady Bunch, where it was two separate families essentially coming together and then they lived in one. But you had this sort of stereotype where they had a house, remember Alice and then the maid? That doesn't really fit in today's dynamic. You don't really have a house, maid or a caregiver, nanny, if you will. That doesn't really fit in today's sort of mantra of what we think of American society. And I really don't know what the average American family looks like. We get our general emotions based off of what we see in TV, what we see in movies, what we see in our friends and families. But there's sort of this facade, right? We have this sort of public image that we want to express, that we want people to see about us. But what actually happens when the lights are off, or at least dim in the evenings, the doors are locked, and you're just with your family, you're doing your day to day? What does that look like? I know for us, it's not always pretty. I'll be honest, it's not. There's frustrations with the kid when he wants to. Yesterday, he ate cat food again. Yeah, we had a discussion about that. And, I think about how I handle situations too. I tend to not have the best patience in the world, so I tend to be the first one to want to discipline. And Raven, and because I have a much more big, boomy voice, I'll just I'm going to back away from the mic so you kind of don't hear me shout, but it'll be like, Junior, get out of there now. I right or wrong or indifferent, you can judge me how you will, but it's just the instinct of get out of there, because you can imagine, and I'm sure you've been in this situation, you're just trying to get your own stuff done, and all you want is your kid not to eat the cat food. It's like, it feels like this should not be something I have to tell my kid not to do, kind of thing. But you get the idea too that he's 4, right? And he's gonna do 4-year-old things, and you have to remind yourself of that and just sigh a little bit and just be like, Lord, how many more years until 18? No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, if you're being honest as a parent, you think about that. But some of the other things you think about as a parent are, how am I raising this child? What are the values that I'm putting into my kid? And how is that being affected in the larger grand scheme of things? Do I think about this on a political spectrum? Do I want a world where, my kid feels like a minority because he actually wants to stand and put his heart across his chest for the Pledge of Allegiance? Do they even do the Pledge of Allegiance in schools anymore? These are questions I don't even know. It was every day on the day. And that's how I grew up. But I don't even know if they do that in schools anymore. I guess I don't know. I'll find out, Probably won't be while I was in pre-K, but, every bit of kindergarten up, I'll be kind of curious if they still do it, in public schools. It seems like something that's going away now. My dad used to tell me they would pray in school before they started their day. And I'm just like, yeah, that ain't happening anymore. And so it's just these dynamics that change. And I think as parents, we kind of want some bits of how it was when we were kids. We think that maybe it was better. And I'm going to start pointing to some research here. But I know when I was approaching this subject this week after hearing Steven Crowder's statement and story about his new family, I also watch another family where I kind of sort of derive some of these. If you guys ever watch The Smiths, if you're familiar with the country singer Granger Smith, they have the family YouTube channel called The Smiths, and they have, you know, two kids and the wife, and he's touring, and they show their whole life, you know, building a house and doing all those things, and it's I think it's amazing, and it's something that I was really interesting to, even if it is edited way down. It is interesting to actually see a country music star express how he and his family go about their day-to-day lives, and the things that he's doing as a father, the things that they're doing as parents together, in how they raise their kids. And it's interesting because they live on this huge acreage out in Texas, and almost seems like he lets his kids just do whatever, let them explore, let them go in the mud, and let them go grab things and do things. And I think if my kid were out there in that similar situation, I'm not sure I would let him just go and grab things. But maybe that is me being a little bit overprotective. Maybe I'm not letting him explore more. But am I changing his views? There's the projections that I'm giving him now, are those going to change as he gets older? Or will he develop a conservative attitude? Or will he be rebellious? Because I was so, maybe if I was so restrictive now and not letting him explore and keeping those reins tied on, is he going to become more rebellious as a teenager? And am I pushing him away ultimately in the end am I over disciplining? Am I overdoing this? So let's talk about the family dynamics of America and this idea, because you can clearly tell I have exceptionally conservative views in my personal life, and they revolve around church. They revolve around uh, this idea of you plan ahead, you have a high moral standard, you obey the rules, you don't challenge, you don't, yeah, and it sort of has this much more locked down, you know, kind of approach, and I have to kind of realize that. All right, so I wanted to kind of switch over here to one of my screens here. So I'm gonna go here. Whoops, wrong one. There we go. You guys had the multi-viewer. Anyway, so I wanted to start kind of towards the top here. So a political study reveals the major factor that influences families to be conservative. Now, there was a lot of good stuff in this article. This one was probably one of my favorites. It was inverse.com. And I'm going to quote something here. So the study makes essentially a basic point, which is that family size and social attitudes are correlated to our study co-author, Tom Vogel, a development economist at the University of California, San Diego, tells Inverse it also demonstrates, he says, the consequences of that correlation for the composition of the population and how it affects public opinion and population-wide. Take that. That whole statement may not make a lot of sense. I think this next paragraph will help bring a little clarity, and then I'll try to elaborate here too. So Vogel teamed up with Jeremy Fries, a sociologist at Harvard University, and together they analyzed the responses of 12,017 adults all over 25 years of age who participated in the U.S. General Society Social Survey between the years 2004 and 2018. Specifically, they looked at the views of the respondents towards two contentious issues: abortion and same-sex marriage. They proposed a fake scenario. Instead of families of all sizes, and I'm going to start paraphrasing here, but what they did is, what if the child had wound up only having the exact attitudes as their parents do today, but they were representing the population as a whole, and the parents had exactly only one child? What happens? If you only have one child, and you assume that that child takes on the exact views, the exact ideologies that you do, what happens? When they applied the scenario to the data, the team found that the likelihood that survey respondents had opposing views towards same-sex marriage and abortion rose by 3 to 4 percentage points than if traditional family conversation had been independent of family size in the current generation. You can go on. I included a few more details, but for time's sake here, I'm going to move on here. And it's interesting because it does instill, because I feel like you're able to influence your kid more when it's just one of them. And I could be wrong here. But when you have multiple kids, the 1-to-1 parent to child ratio kind of goes down naturally. So then the kids sort of develop their own sort of influences based off you, based off their siblings, based off school and other factors. It's not so much 1-to-1. That's kind of my hypothesis on this, on why that may be occurring. So another study here. So this is from differential fertility makes more social conservative and family values. Basically, the more fertile you are, the more kids you are, the more conservative you're going to be, is essentially what this one's saying. You guys can read this by pnas.org. Ignore what I just said there because that just sounded really bad, but pnas.org. Oh man, that's one for blooper reel. Anyway, but data from the General Society survey indicates that... Oh, I got to keep this together. Is that as funny to you, producer Raven, as it is to me? Yeah, she says, get your mind out of the gutter. I should do that. Yeah, weird things distract me, guys. Anyway, but data from the General Society survey indicates that higher fertility individuals and their children are more conservative on family values issues, especially regarding abortion and same-sex marriage. This was generally the biggest data point that I was able to find. I guess if you're going to define a family and their views, these are probably two issues that you would mostly look at. I would also think about medical and things like that too, but hey, I can only give me what a study gives me, right? The last one, okay, oh, not this last one, I got a few more, but this is the one I was most interested in. As far as a conceptual thing and thinking about it, like I said with the butterfly kisses earlier, I mentioned. So study having daughters makes parents more likely to be Republican. Now this comes from Pew Research, and basically 2 sociologists found that parents having daughters, especially if the daughter was the firstborn, were more apt to be conservative. And I think I know why that is. And this may sound a little weird to you guys, so just follow me here. So if you think about when you are at, let's say, church, a park, and there's lots of families and boys and girls, and you think about, let's say, hypothetically, you see 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They're running. Okay, we'll just take the playground scenario because I think this one's a little bit more realistic. They're both running and playing together, right? Both of them crash into something. Let's just say they weren't paying attention. They were looking and they both hit one of the poles, on a playground set. Which child would you be more worried about if both of them hurt themselves at the exact same time? And if you say both of them, I think you're lying. Of course, you're worried about both of them, but which one is ever so slightly more? If I were to take a guess, and maybe this is my own opinion, and this is also taking the fact that I don't have a daughter, I only have a son, I'm probably more worried about the girl. Just a little bit. That's probably the first child I go up to, assuming also that they're, let's say, the same age. Let's say 6 years old. Both of them are 6. And I think the tendency would go up to the daughter more, or first, let's say, and then immediately go to the boy. But don't you think that mind? And I think that stereotype has gotten into my head. And please let me know in the comments if you're wrong. Like, do you worry about your boy more than your girl? If you're a family and you have a son and a daughter, do you worry more about your son or do you worry more about your daughter? And why? I think that is a good question to ask in the comments. So please let me know what your thoughts are. As for me, I think I'd be more worried about the daughter. Now, my son, he crashes into stuff all the time. Be like, you hurt? Good. All right, get over it. Quit that whining. You're good. You're okay. You didn't die. It's just a scratch. You'll be fine. That's my attitude, honestly. And it's just comes from how I guess I was. I'll tell you another quick story here, given our time here. But when I was a kid, I was playing outside one time, and I just fell face first down, but there happened to be a piece of glass, and my hand hit the glass, and I was just like, whatever. I looked, but then I looked at my hand, and I had like a stream of blood just pouring out of the soft part of my hand here. And I went inside. I told my mom, hey, Mom, I cut myself. And then she woke up, she was napping, I remember, and she looked at my hand, she saw the blood, she's like, and she just launched out of her chair and ran me over to the sink and started cleaning. Like, she just like went from sleep mode to hyperdrive mode. And I guess it was worse than it was. I don't think I ended up with stitches. I think we got the bleeding to stop, but I didn't care. Like, I had a high pain tolerance as a kid. I just did. And so I think that carries over to my son. I just expect him to be the same. Maybe he's not. I'm probably wrong. But first kid, first learning experience. That's what I'm going to chalk this up to. No parent knows it all, gets it all right the first time. So one other thing I wanted to challenge here real quick is the image of Christians being conservative 100% of the time and always going to vote for the Republican. Now, the study that I'm looking at here is really old. I apologize, but it was the best I could do because I wanted to find out how Christians' views were. Maybe if there's a newer one out there, please send me the link. I'm happy to like. This one also looks at African American Christians versus white Christians too. So African Americans or other religion, Word of God. It was kind of interesting. Mainland Protestant. So this one is votes for Democrats in the 1992 to 2002 presidential election. So this is looking at how many people voted for Democrats. Now, in the African American, it was 92, 96%. That kind of fits, I don't know, stereotype. Maybe if you think about it. I'm just saying. Let's just stick with numbers here. So 90 some percent at that point we're doing that, and only 34 to 40% of Christians, which still breaks a mold, I feel like, even in the 1990s of what Christian views are and how they vote. So it's not just, look at that. So Inspired Word of God voted for Democrats, or that, and it's similar here. Attended services weekly. So conservative Protestant, only 28%, and 40% mainland Protestant, and African Americans were way more likely to go to church every weekly. So that was interesting to kind of see that. How many did it 2 to 4 times a month? Once a month. It was kind of 50-50. But you see, like, African Americans are actually way more into church. You may not know that or think about that, but I would say that honestly probably still holds up today. Never was negligible. And then 48 to 57% of what you would consider Protestants never go to church. Think about that. And this was in the 90s. And I can only imagine, given our current affairs, this probably is worse. Read the Bible in the past year daily, nearly 100%. This is sad. And I think that this number still is true. So as a Christian, I'm a little surprised to see how low these numbers were even back then. Now, am I perfect about reading the Bible every single day? I am not, no. But when I think about, voting for Democrats or all of that, and I look at some of these, and there was actually more to this, so I apologize, not all of the data actually got copied over. So please feel free to look at this link. I did share it here. So this is from University of Chicago. So you guys can look at that. But that was really interesting to me. That's most of the notes that I have here today for you guys. So on my note sheet, you'll see this chart too when you're looking at it. But yeah, I thought this was really enlightening, and hopefully you kind of learned something here today. I know it kind of changed my view a little bit. And one thing I wanted to share real quick is there are certain issues that I tend to lean more, I guess you would call it liberal or left on. And those include like healthcare and things like that, because I experience a lot of healthcare challenges myself. And I experience what it's like to worry about, am I going to be able to pay for a medical bill or not? And I don't feel that getting basic healthcare, is a status or something that we should get less healthcare, less care, less access to medication because of economic situations. I kind of feel like everybody should be able to at least get the standard level of care. Now, if you're wanting premium services, of course, you should pay more. And I'm not saying we not pay anything at all, but what I'm saying is you shouldn't have to spend, $6,000 a month on a single medication. And I think like if you spent $300, let's say it was 15% of your income, in medical, that's like the cap to me. Like if you had to pay more in medical expenses, you'd never survive. And I just don't know how anyone else would do it. And it doesn't seem right to me and things like that. I think about climate. I do think climate change is real. I do think that our ice caps are melting. I do think that we have a responsibility to, as a society, try to change our behaviors when it comes to waste and fossil fuels and things like that. I'm not the kind of person who's going to go out and buy a Tesla, though, but I would be the kind of person who would say, hey, let's think about some social stuff and all that. All right. Well, anyway, I want to thank you guys so much again for watching Between the Lines. Again, my name is John Lofton. We do this every single week. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Please like and subscribe and watch, and we'll see you next week. And P.S., here's a special treat from my son.